of Tennessee Extension here in Sevier County, and we're again with the Can series. Let's talk a few minutes about jars. Canning jars obviously are very critical in the canning process when we're preserving our food. A couple of things I'd like for you to look for. I know that a lot of people have yard sales and sell jars, and just be careful and look at what you're buying. What about this jar? Can we use this one? Ha ha. Probably back in 1910, 1920, we could have used this, but research has come a long way, and this is no longer safe. This makes a nice piece though to use in decorating the house, and you can actually go online and look at the Ball logo and determine the age of a jar. I even noticed this had bubbles in it when it was made. So to be honest with you now, if you find jars that have bubbles in them, or maybe flaws or streaks on the jar, then those are not safe for canning because it weakens the jar. And you want to make sure with canning that you have really good stable jars for the heat. Back in 1910, of course, the tops were different. You may have heard about, or maybe when I was growing up, they used the paraffin wax even for canning. No, that's no longer safe. So basically, good old jars and rings and flats are what we're using now. Let's talk for a minute about jars. Make sure when you buy your canning jars, they have a reputable name, Ball or Mason. Some of the off-brand jars, from personal experience, just didn't quite make it. So stick to those. Think about like mayonnaise jars, pickle jars, just plain old jars. You know, they're not good for canning. They may look like the right size, but they're not made for canning to withstand the heat. So you do not want to use just jars lying around the house. Make sure you use a jar made for canning. And also, by the way, these canning jars can also be put in the freezer. They can withstand the low temperature too. So it's really worth the investment. If you find some jars that are Ball or Mason or for canning, make sure you look at them. If they've been used, make sure there's no cracks, there's no nicks at the top here. Make sure they're in good shape. If they have like a hard film inside, I read that you can actually clean them by putting a cup of vinegar and a gallon of water and heating that and putting that in your jars, and that will help take care of the film. There's basically two sizes of jars, well really three. We have the pint jars, the quart jars, and then for your jellies and jams, we have a half a pint, and we'll be showing those later. Also with your jars, you may see a wide mouth jar compared to the regular jar. Just personal preference here. Sometimes the wide mouth jars are easier to put your food in. So that's just, again, personal preference. So with our jars, things you need to think about also are what we call a flat and a ring, okay? Our flats actually go on top of the jar, and then we put the ring down, and we'll be showing you that in one of our series. The magic about the flats is that they have a sealing compound. It's orange here, and actually what happens during the canning process, while this is being processed, air is driven out of the jar, and when that happens, then that sealing compound actually melts and adheres and sticks to the jar. It's a permanent seal. That's what we want, okay? And that's made possible through that sealing compound. So that's why it's important when you're using the flats, make sure that they have the sealing compound. They're brand new. You don't want to ever use flats that have been used before. They have to be brand new. And also make sure that your jar has no nicks here because you want a good seal. Also, we'll be talking about filling the jars. We want to make sure we don't have any food or liquid that is on top of here, because that would prevent that from having a good seal. You want this to be a clean, even surface. Once you put the flat on, then you'll put the rings on. Flats cannot be reused. The rings can be reused. The only problem that you need to think about with rings, sometimes once we use them, you need to always dry them. And if you have rings that are rusted, then you need to make sure you need to throw those away. So rings can be reused unless they're bent or unless they're rusted. So it's a good thing to think about before you start your canning, to have those jars out, have them ready, and look at them. Make sure you always wash them. You can wash them in the dishwasher, and I always put the drying cycle on. And when we're canning, we want to keep the jars warm, so we usually put them in the oven, and we'll show you that in just a few minutes to keep the jars warm. So that's really some important things to think about. If you're processing, let's say you're making something and it says process for 10 minutes or more, then you really do not have to pre-sterilize the jars. They still need to be washed, and I always put the drying cycle on my dishwasher and then keep them warm, but they do not have to be pre-sterilized if it says process 10 minutes or more. If it's under 10 minutes, then you would need to actually sterilize these in boiling water after they've been washed. So I hope that you'll join us again. I think, Sarah Vaden, didn't you have something that you told me about when you went to the store this morning that you wanted to share about jars?
I do. A jar is a jar is a jar is a jar. Not so. Now they're coming out with great decorative jars, so it's like everybody's got to have the newest and latest. Maybe they've got a twist to them. But what you need to make sure is that you follow your recipe. So let's say that there's a cute jar that's this tall and it's got some twist and it's got a flower on it and it's for jelly. Well, your jelly should just be for ½ pint because of their density. They can't be canned where in that pretty jar. They can be canned in another cute one that's just the same size as the ½ pint. Same thing with, let's say you're wanting to do your green beans and you're wanting them to be decorative. Yes, you can use your pint jar. You can use your quart jar. There are different processing times. So let's say that this one's 16 ounce, but you find a real cute one that's 20 ounces. Well, you can't use this processing time. You're going to need to process up to the quart size. So always move up to the next size when you're looking at your approved recipes, because we want to make sure that all those germs are being killed and they're out of there. So we want to make sure that we're processing for a proper amount of time. So enjoy those fancy jars, but make sure you're using the right size. We'll see you next time on the Can Girls.